Okay, next up we have another topic. How do we rake a hair tubes? So this is a typical way you rake it. You would create a joints chains for the hair tube because the hair tube needs to be bent very smoothly. So you would want to have a lot of joints so that you could create a smooth deformation. However, if there are just too many joints to control, right? So how do you bend them? If you do not create these many joints, if you create just a few, for example, if you just create just a few joints, I'm going to delete history and rebind it again. Let's say if you have just a few joints and you bind it to this skeleton, what's happening is that you will get very ugly bends, right? You don't get smooth bends. So how do we make smooth bends without having to control so many joints? The problem is that we need to find a way to control these very long joint chain. So deformation, you can't go away from using a lot of joints. So we still bind this to. Let me unbind this first. Okay, so let's bind it again. So we can't get away from this. The deformation really requires a lot of joints to make a smooth deformation. However, how do we control them? In Maya, there is something called a spline IK handle. So what it does, let me show you how it works. What it does is that you let me just hide this for now. So let's go back to create IK handle. Alright, so now my cursor has changed to a crosshair, so it's expecting me to click on 2 points. The first point and the last point of the joint chain to create a spline IK handle. So first point, last point, and you see it creates something. It creates a handle, but it also changes the deformation of the joints. I mean the rotation of joints. What it does is that it creates a curve. You don't really see it here, but if you look at the outliner, there's a new curve that is created. This curve actually allows you to deform the joint chain. So if you select the curve, change it to the component mode, you will be able to control the CVs of the curves. And by controlling the CV, you deform the curves, and the curve then changes the shapes of the joint chains. So that's the basic idea of it. So let's undo it. Let's look at some of the options in the IK handle, spline IK handle. So let's go into the option box. So we want to look at these number of spans here. If we don't auto simplify curve, it will try to create a curve that will conform to the shape of our joint chain. Right, so that's the curve. Let's take a look at the curve. So we create a curve that looks like this, but this curve will have too many um, CVs on it, and it also kind of defeat our purpose, because we actually want to have a curve with fewer CVs so that we can just grab those few CVs and change the shape of the curve, and then change the shape of the hair tube, right? So we actually don't want to have such a detailed curve. So let's undo it. So let's go back to this tool here again. So we actually do want to simplify the curve, but we do want to simplify it so that it doesn't change the shape of my hair tube that much. So default, it creates a curve with only one span. One span means if you have to understand CV curves a little bit. Let me draw a CV curve so you understand what a span actually means. So one span, this is one span, and when you have 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so let me see how many spans are there. So there are 5 spans already. Basically, one span is will give you 4 CVs. 2 spans will give you, I think, I don't remember how many CVs. I think 2 spans will give you, let me see, let me just draw it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 1 span. One more, that should be 2 span, right? 2 span. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 3 spans. Okay, so any additional span will give you 1 more CVs. So 1 span, 4 CVs, 2 spans, another additional CVs. So 4 spans will give you 8 CVs. So I think that's the max this tool can provide, but I think that would be good enough. So what we want to do now is to create an IK handle. Let's make sure that we want to auto simplify it with 4 spans. Right? It still changed the shape of the joint chain a little bit, but it's actually kind of still acceptable. It's not a lot. So now we have a curve that allows us to modify the joint chain. Alright, then the next step is to create a control object so that we could control the curves more effectively, because right now you have to go into the component mode and grab these CVs. It's very inconvenient. Okay, so what is the other options to control this curve? Well, there's a quick way. You just create another joint chain, a much simplified joint chain. Use this joint chain to bind it to the curve. Use the skin binding to bind it to the curve. Okay, skin binding not only can bind a skeleton to a surface, it could also be bound to a curve. So we're going to use the simplified joint chain, bind it to a curve. Now, what's going to happen is that this low res joint chain is going to deform the curve, and the curve is going to deform the IK handle, which in turn deform the hair tubes. So that's a very indirect way of controlling the skin. So there are basically 2 joint chains. One for controlling the curve, and one for actually deforming the mesh, right? So that's one method. The other method, right, is to, right, this curve is still there. The other method is to use something called a skin cluster. Not a skin cluster, cluster deformer, right? So let me isolate this curve and switch on the component mode so we can see the individual CV. So what we can do, you can select a bunch of components and create something called a cluster. What a cluster does is that it creates an object, so that in object mode you can grab that object and move it. This allows you to get access to the components on the object level. It allows you to access the components at the object level. 即係話你可以喺你唔需要特登轉去 component mode， 你都可以影響到啲 components。component 可以係 vertex， 可以係 CV， 可以係 edge， 可以係 face。Okay, so what we're going to do now is select maybe 2 CVs or maybe 1 CV, create a cluster, right? And maybe these two can be one cluster. And then these will be another cluster. This will be another cluster. Right, so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clusters that we could use to change the shape of the hair. Right, so what we can do now is to group all these clusters. We actually could create control object that controls the cluster. So what we could do now is to create a curve. So one for this cluster, so I'm going to snap it to the cluster. Right, doesn't need to be very precise, just like somewhere near the cluster, and kind of follow the shape of the hair tubes. Alright, so we could then, freeze transform okay. Oh, the duplicates. Oh, okay, don't know why they're duplicates. Right, before we freeze transform, we actually want to do create a group. Yeah. I guess we can just freeze transform. Alright. So now this will, you see how difficult it is to grab a cluster? It won't let you select unless you turn it into wireframe mode, and then we can do a parent constraint. This will do a parent constraint. This will parent constraint the cluster. We're creating control objects to control the cluster, and which in turn controls the component of the curve. There should be another cluster at the end. Very hard to see. All right. So now, yeah, you can grab these. These maybe would, let's group them. Let's call this here 1. And this will be a controller. Group. This will be grouped under the face, so that when the face moves, here 2 follows. Right, but you can also position them, or you could have this parented to this, have this parented to this, and have this parented to this, so you can create a hierarchy within the control object, so that you can rotate one and the rest will follow, kind of like a joint chain. All right. Something like that. Okay, so that's 2 methods to control the hair tubes.